Chapter 1. London, summer 1889. The other prisoners eyed me as if I were a piece of tender meat. I was someone new to distract them from their boredom, and small enough that I couldn't stop one, let alone four, from doing what they wanted. It was only a matter of who would be the first to enjoy me. "He's mine." The prisoner's tongue darted out through his tangled beard and licked what I supposed were lips, hidden beneath all that wiry black hair. "Come here, boy." I shuffled away from him, but instead of the brick wall of the cell, I smacked into a soft body. "Looks like he wants me, Dobby. Don't you, lad?" Large hands clamped around my arms, and thick fingers dug into my flesh through my jacket and shirt. The man spun me around, and I gaped up at the brute grinning toothlessly at me. My heart rose and dove, and cold sweat trickled down my spine. He was massive. He wore no jacket or waistcoat, only a shirt stained with blood, sweat, and grime. The top buttons had popped open, most likely from the strain of containing his enormous chest, and a thatch of grey hair sprouted through the gap and crept up to his neck rolls. Hot, foul breath assaulted my nostrils. I tried to turn my face away, but he grasped my jaw. The wrenching motion caused my hair to slide off my forehead and eyes, revealing more of my face than I had in a long time. A new fear spread through me, as sickening as the man I faced. Only 2 prisoners seemed interested in a boy. But if they realized I was a girl, the others would likely want me too. "Anyone ever tell you you're too pretty for a boy?" My tormentor chuckled, but he didn't seem like he'd discovered my secret. "Pretty boys can get themselves into trouble." Girls even more so. It was just my ill luck to get caught stealing an apple from the costermonger's cart outside the cemetery and wind up in the overcrowded holding cell at Highgate Police Station. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it wasn't in the least amusing. As an 18-year-old girl, I should be separated from the men, but I'd been passing myself off as a 13-year-old boy for so long it hadn't even occurred to me to tell the policeman. With my half-starved body and mop of hair covering most of my face, nobody had questioned my gender or age. The big brute jerked me forward, slamming me against his body. My nose smacked into a particularly filthy patch of his shirt, and I gagged at the combined stenches of sweat, vomit, excrement, and gin. I wasn't too clean myself, but this fellow's odor was overpowering. Bile burned my throat, but I swallowed it quickly. Showing weakness would only make it worse for me. I knew that from experience. "Come here and keep old Badger warm." Warm? It was summer, and the cell was hotter than a furnace with 4 adult men and myself, crammed into a space designed for one. "I'm next," said the bearded Dobby, closing in to get a better look at me. "If there's anything left of him after old Badger's broken him in." Badger chuckled again and fumbled with the front of his trousers. I closed my hands into fists and clamped down on my fear. Shouting for the constable wouldn't help. He told the other prisoners to enjoy when he tossed me into the cell. It had only been a few minutes since he'd walked off, whistling. It felt like hours. I had to fight now. It was the only way left. Not that I stood a chance against the men, but they might beat me unconscious with any luck. It was best not to be awake while they took their liberties. I swung my fist, but Badger was faster than he looked. He caught my wrist and sneered. "That ain't going to help you." The sneer vanished, and he shoved me into the wall. I put my hands up and managed to stop myself smashing into the whitewashed bricks, but my wrists and arms jarred from the force. I gasped in pain, but smothered the cry that welled up my throat. "Leave the boy alone." The voice wasn't one I'd heard yet. It didn't come from outside the cell, but from another prisoner to my right. What'd you say? Badger snarled. I said, leave the boy alone. He's just a child. I turned and pressed my back into the wall. My rescuer stood in a similar position, his arms crossed over his chest. He was perhaps late 20s, with fair hair and cloudy grey eyes circled by red-rimmed lids. He wasn't nearly as tall as Badger, nor as solid, and I doubted he could defeat either Badger or Dobby in a fight. My heart sank. You going to make us? Dobby asked. The man shrugged, then winced as if the movement hurt. He sported a bruise on his cheek, and his blonde hair was matted with blood. One must try. It's the decent thing to do. One must try. Badger mimicked the other man's tough accent to perfection. Dobby and the fourth prisoner lounging on the cot bed laughed. Dobby straightened his back, threw out his chest, and effected a feminine walk to where the man stood. The prisoner on the bed laughed even harder at the hairy beast's acting. Ooh, protect me from these brutes, sir, whimpered Dobby in a high voice. You're my hero. The blonde man lowered his hands to his sides and curled them into fists. I held my breath and waited for the first punch to be thrown. The man smiled instead. It held no humour. Dobby tugged on the lapels of the blonde man's jacket, pretending to straighten it, then fidgeted with the high, stiff shirt collar. The gentleman wore no tie, and his hat and gloves were also missing. The fine cut of his clothes reminded me of my father, always so perfectly groomed. Even the fellow's aristocratic bearing was very much like my father's. Whether it was also an affectation this gentleman had developed, it was difficult to tell. I wasn't as experienced with the upper members of society and their ways as I used to be. Finished? The blonde man drawled. I wondered why the gentleman had landed in jail, and why he was defending me, a stranger. He'd get himself killed if he didn't keep quiet. His fun spoiled by the gentleman's lack of fear, Dobby snorted and moved away. He turned back to me and licked his lips. Badger wiped the back of his hand over his mouth and eyed me with renewed interest. He reached for me, but the blonde man smacked his hand away. Neither Badger nor I had noticed him approach. Badger bared his teeth in a snarl. You don't get to ruin Badger's fun. He smashed his fist into the blonde man's face, sending him reeling back into the bed. The prisoner lounging there had to quickly pull his legs up or be sat on. The blonde man recovered, and with a growl of rage lunged at Badger. But he swung his fists wildly, and his blows merely glanced off the bigger, meaner prisoner. Badger responded with another punch to the gentleman's jaw. Blood splattered from the blonde man's mouth as he careened backward and slammed into the wall. His head smacked into the bricks, and the crack of his skull turned my stomach. Dobby laughed, sending the spittle flying from the slit in his beard. Badger dusted off his hands and watched as the gentleman folded in on himself and crumpled to the floor like a rag doll. My heart sank, and it was only then that I realized I'd let it rise in hope. My rescuer was dead. A sickening fear assaulted me along with the memories of that terrible night 5 years ago, when my mother had died. I could still hear my father's accusation, still feel the sting of his belt across my back, and the icy rain he'd sent me into with the order never to return home. Yet those awful memories could help me now, if the prisoners reacted to my strange ability as my father had. It was my only hope. I knelt alongside the gentleman's lifeless form and placed my hands on either side of his face, as I had done to my mother after she'd breathed her last. While I'd been overset by tears then, I wasn't now, and I could see the grey pallor of death consuming his youthful face. I stroked his jaw. It was still warm, and his short whiskers felt rough on my palms. Someone behind me snickered. You can't do nothing for him now, boy. Let old Badger comfort you, eh? I didn't move. and he didn't rip me away from the body, thank goodness. I needed to touch it. At least, I think I did. I'd only ever done this once before. What if I couldn't repeat it? What if my connection to my mother had been the key that time and it wouldn't work on a stranger? I caressed his face, as if we'd been the most intimate of lovers, and willed his spirit to rise. Please speak to me. Do this for me and help me to live. I don't want to die here like this. I didn't want to die at all. That, in itself, was something of a revelation, but I had no chance to think about it further. A pale wisp rose from the body. At first it looked like a slender ribbon of smoke. Then it grew larger and took on the shape of the dead man. It was still as thin as a veil of silk chiffon, but it moved as if it held solid form. The spirit frowned at me from his floating position, then settled his gaze on his own lifeless figure. He sighed. And so it ends. My heart ground to a halt. I'm sorry, I whispered. The spirit blinked at me as if surprised that we were communicating. Not your fault. I brought it on myself. I'd had enough of living, you see. He sighed again. My parents said I would amount to nothing, and they were right. Couldn't even get in a good punch. He nodded at Badger, who was standing behind me. What's he saying? Dobby asked. He's talking to the dead, Badger said. Boy's mad. He snorted and spat a glob of green mucus on the floor near my feet. Get up, lad. It won't go well for you if I have to drag you over here. The spirit's face twisted with disgust. Wish I could have done something to help you, child. I haven't accomplished much in my life, but my hatred of bullies is well known. Just ask my father. He laughed at a joke I wasn't privy to. That's something, eh? A legacy I can leave behind? I didn't think it was much of a legacy, but I didn't say so. He was my only friend in that cell, and I needed him. There is one thing you can do for me before you go, I whispered. What's he saying? Dobby repeated. I don't bloody care. Badger's hand closed around my shoulder, and he wrenched me away from the body. He fumbled with the front of his trousers again. I had only seconds. Get back into your body, I told the spirit. I no longer kept my voice low. He needed to hear me, and it didn't matter who else did now. The die was already cast. The spirit didn't move. How? I wasn't entirely sure. When my mother had done it, she'd simply floated back down into her body when I'd asked her to. Lie on yourself, I told him. Badger's fingers gripped my jaw, smashing the inside of my mouth into my teeth. Shut it, he snapped. I don't want to hear no lunatic talk. Do you hear me? He's soft in the head. Dobby bent to get a better look at me. If Badger hadn't been holding my jaw, I would have smashed my forehead into his nose. Bloody hell! The other prisoner leapt off the bed, his eyes huge. He's still alive! Badger let me go. He stumbled back and stared at the now standing body. It wasn't alive, but the spirit had re-entered it and was controlling it. Even though I knew what was happening, the sight still made my blood run cold. The body turned to Badger. The insipid, blank eyes of the dead man were as lifeless as they had been moments ago, and it wasn't certain how the spirit could see through them. The third prisoner crossed himself. Dobby mewed. Badger continued to stumble backward until he fell over his own feet and landed heavily on his backside. What me do? The brittle, thin voice coming from the corpse startled me as much as it did the prisoners. It was nothing like the spirit's smooth one. It was as if he laboured to get the dead vocal organs working. I don't know, I said. Jesus Christ, Dobby muttered. He joined the other prisoner in the cell corner, as far away from the body and me as possible. You control me. The body bent over the cowering, sweating badger. The brute looked like he'd pee his trousers if the dead man got any closer. "Kill!" "Can you?" I asked. It wasn't a request, but an honest question, since the gentleman hadn't been able to so much as punch Badger when he'd been alive. As the colour drained from Badger's face, I realised how it must have sounded. I didn't correct myself. "Constable!" Badger screamed. "Constable, get this madman out of here!" Was he referring to the reanimated corpse? Or me? I laughed. I couldn't help it. Perhaps I was mad, but seeing the cruel Badger frightened out of his wits was the most gratifying experience of my life, and I was going to enjoy it while it lasted. Unfortunately, that wasn't long. The constable's face appeared at the slit in the door. "What's all this noise about?" "Get it out! Get it out!" Badger threw his arms over his face like a child hiding under the sheets at night. "Shut up in there!" "He's gone mad," I said to the guard. Badger kept screaming at the constable to remove the devil, and the other prisoner joined in. Dobby slunk back against the wall, away from us, away from the door. The door that was now opening. "Bloody hell, don't make me come in there, you bleeding idiot," said the constable as he stepped into the cell. He wasn't armed, and his attention was distracted by Badger and the others. "What's got up your arse, anyway?" "Let's get out of here," I said quietly to the corpse. Like an automaton, the body turned stiffly toward the door. The constable took one look at those dead eyes and fell to his knees. "Devil," he muttered before launching into an earnest prayer. I almost didn't move, so stunned was I at the similarity to my father's reaction when he'd first seen Mamma's corpse rise. But a nudge from the dead man got my feet working. I slipped past the constable and out the door. The body lumbered after me with jerky, awkward steps, as if the swift movement was too difficult for its dead, uncoordinated limbs. "Hoy there, stop!" Another policeman ran toward us, his truncheon raised. The body pulled back bloodless lips and hissed. The constable dropped the truncheon, then took off in the opposite direction. "Hurry," I urged the body. "If you wish." His voice sounded stronger, not as strained, and his steps were more sure now. He seemed to have adjusted to his deceased state. We ran along a corridor, past another 2 holding cells. 3 more constables fell back from us with gasps and terrified mutterings. Only one challenged us, and the corpse under my command pushed him away. Easily. It seemed he was stronger now he was dead than when he was alive. "You there!" shouted the constable behind the desk in the reception room. "What's—" He stumbled back as the corpse turned vacant eyes and white face toward him. The clang of a bell sounded from behind us, warning of a prisoner escape. Ordinarily, it would signal for all available constabulary at the station to chase us. But none did. Their fear of the devil overrode any sense of duty. The dead man pushed me toward the door. We ran, but he stopped before reaching freedom. I stopped too. "Do not let them catch you, child." "And you?" I asked. "When you are safe, release my spirit." "How?" "Speak the command. Now go." The desk constable approached uncertainly, his shaking hand clutching a revolver. He swallowed heavily and pointed it at the corpse. I slipped out the door and into South Grove. The street was surprisingly empty, but then I realized any passers-by would have scattered when they heard the bell. I darted into a nearby lane as a gunshot joined the cacophony. "I release you," I said softly. "Go to your afterlife." I never found out if my words, spoken from some distance, were enough to release the spirit from his body and send him on his way. I hoped so. He died for me, and I owed him whatever peace was in my power to give. I kept running, not daring to stop or steal anything despite my hunger. I hadn't eaten in 3 days, and then it had been only some strawberries. My last experience at thieving had got me arrested. It was the one and only time I'd been caught. I prided myself on being one of the best thieves on the north side of London, but I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to trust myself again. For now, it didn't matter. I was too intent on getting as far away from the police as possible to think of food. When I finally reached Clerkenwell, I slowed. My throat and lungs burned. My heart crashed against my ribs. But I was far from Highgate Police Station and there'd been no sign of pursuit. I took the long route to the Rookery just in case, and stopped outside the old crumbling house with the rotten window sashes and door. I glanced up and down the lane, and seeing no one about, I pulled aside the loose boards at knee height. I squeezed through the hole and let the boards flap closed behind me. "Charlie's back!" shouted Mink, standing lookout near the trap door that led down to the cellar. The boy lifted his chin at me in greeting. It was as much as he ever acknowledged me. He wasn't much of a talker. "'Bout bloody time," came the gruff voice of Stringer from down in hell. That's what we called the cellar. It was an apt name for our crowded living quarters where we ate, slept, and passed the time. It was cold and damp in winter, hot and airless in summer, but it kept us off the streets and out of danger. "Thought you'd scarpered." Stringer popped his head through the trap door. His face and hair were dirty, and I could smell the stink of the sewers on him from where I stood near the entrance. He must have gone wandering down there again. "I got arrested," I said. Both Stringer and Mink blinked at me. Then Stringer roared with laughter, almost propelling himself off the ladder. "You, Fleetfoot Charlie, caught by the filth? Well, well, never thought I'd see the day. Oi, lads, listen to this. Charlie got himself arrested." "How'd you get out?" asked Mink in his quiet voice. He was a serious boy compared to the others, and watchful. He didn't join in with the annoying pranks they liked to pull, and he could read well enough too. I liked him more than the rest of the gang members, but that wasn't saying much. I'd almost asked him how he'd learned to read and where he'd lived before he found himself part of Stringer's gang, but decided against it. I didn't know any of the children's past, and they didn't know mine, nor did I get too friendly with them. It would make it easier to leave when the time came. No goodbyes, no sorrows, no ties. That was my motto. I moved on twice a year, every year, and had done so since that wet night Mama died. I couldn't have lived as a 13-year-old boy for over 5 years if I'd stayed with one gang the entire time. "Bit of luck," was all I said to Mink. "Move it, Stringer, and let me past." I thumped his shoulder. He descended the ladder and I followed, leaving Mink to watch the entrance. "Charlie!" cried another boy named Finley. Mink, Stringer, Finley. They weren't real names, but like mine, they were probably near enough. "How'd they catch you, then? Dangle a clean pair of breeches in front of your nose?" The 8 lads lounging in the cellar fell over each other laughing. Ever since I'd mentioned wanting to steal clean clothes to replace my reeking ones, I'd been the butt of their jokes. It made a change from them teasing me for refusing to strip off so much as my shirt in front of them. "Pigs were hiding near the costermonger's cart," I said, lying down on the rags I used as a mattress. It was cleaner than the actual mattress that had been dragged from the upstairs bedroom before the roof caved in. Cleaner, but not free of lice. I scratched my head absently. "I think the costermonger told them to look out for me." "Serves you bloody right for getting slack," Stringer said, kicking my bare foot. I didn't rub the spot despite the pain. It was never a good idea to show weakness, even among boys from my own gang. Perhaps especially to them. "And for going back there, again." One of the other boys snorted. "What are you going there all the time for anyway, Charlie? What's an eye gate?" "Idiot. Don't you know nothing?" Stringer leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. In that pose, he reminded me of the gentleman in the holding cell. Both blonde and slender, there was a certain bravado and defiance about them. My heart pinched. I regretted that the man had lost his life because of me. I sent a silent word of thanks to heaven, hell, or wherever he'd ended up. I wouldn't forget his sacrifice. nor would I make the same mistake again and allow myself to be caught. Life was precarious for homeless children. And women. Stringer rubbed his thumb along his smirking lower lip. He goes to the cemetery. I went very still. He must have followed me once. How much did he know? Did he see me visit Mamma's grave? Or wander around the other headstones imagining what the deceased had once looked like and how they'd lived? Did he know I liked to sit beneath the cedar trees and dream the day away? Finley pulled a face. Blimey, Charlie, that's a bit morbid, ain't it? Morbid, I corrected him automatically. Stringer's smirk turned to a sneer. Shut your old Charlie. No one cares what you've been doing anyway. You got caught today. You got slow. He leaned down and poked me in the shoulder. Never forget that. He hated when I corrected them. It always seemed to bring out the worst in him. I supposed it was because it made him feel inferior to me, when in fact he was the eldest and the leader. Well, not actually the eldest, but no one there knew it. The boys were aged from 8 to 15. Stringer was not only the eldest, but also the biggest. He was already the size of a grown man, and there were rumblings about him leaving the gang of children to take up with a band of more ruthless men who lived in the neighborhood. 2 of the boys had even approached me to take over from him, but I'd refused. It would probably mean I'd have to fight Stringer, and there was no way I could win against him. Besides, it was coming time for me to move on again. Mink, in particular, was beginning to look at me like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Sometimes I wondered if he already knew that I wasn't who I said I was. Anything to eat? I asked to distract Stringer. Some bread, he said, jerking his head at the boy nearest the board we used as a table. The boy tossed a hunk of bread to me. I caught it. Not a crumb flaked off the hard crust. I set it aside with a sigh, not wanting to break my teeth. The afternoon wore on. Boys came and went, some bringing food and water that I didn't touch. While I was hungry, they were hungrier. They always were. That was the problem with boys. I had at least finished my growing, not that I had much to show for it. Sometimes I wondered if I would have been taller, with a more womanly figure, if I'd had plenty to eat in the last 5 years. I would never know now. My size helped me to blend in, so I wasn't overly disappointed. I slept until it was my turn to watch the entrance, then slept again after Finley relieved me. It was mid-morning on a dreary day when I got the first inkling that something was amiss. The boys who returned from foraging, as we called our thieving stints, eyed me warily. They whispered behind their hands and tittered nervously. "What is it?" I said, as one boy crossed himself when he passed me. "Why is everyone staring at me like I've got 2 heads?" He wouldn't answer. "Mink, you'll tell me." But even Mink kept his distance and wouldn't speak to me. I did overhear him tell a group of boys that it wasn't possible, and the devil didn't exist, nor did God. That earned him an eye roll. When Stringer returned around midday and also gave me a wide berth and strange looks, I decided it was time to go for a walk. I wasn't getting answers. I didn't need them anyway. I knew what they'd heard. The gossip network among the gangs was more efficient than any telegraph. I left through the hole in the wall and made my way north out of Clerkenwell. I felt no fear walking among people who were little better off than me. It was safer in the downtrodden suburb than the holding cell at the police station. My patched-up clothing and shoeless feet marked me as not worth robbing, and if a man wanted to rape someone, he would wait for dark and choose someone slower and most likely female. There were easier pickings than a small, quick youth. I wandered for hours, not really heading anywhere. Or so I thought. When I found myself at the top of a familiar Tufnell Park street, I realized long-buried habit had taken me home. Home. The detached red brick house with the white trim couldn't be called that anymore. Home was where you slept at night, and where people who loved you welcomed you with open arms. My father still lived there, but I doubted he would let me in if I knocked on the door. I had visited from time to time, but never ventured further than the shrubs inside the front gate behind which I hid, as I waited for my father to make an appearance. Most times he didn't. I'd seen him only twice in 5 years, when he'd invited in a parishioner who'd come to his door. He'd welcomed them with smiles and a warm handshake. I checked up and down the street, and seeing no one, opened the gate. I cringed at the squeak of hinges and quickly ducked behind the shrubbery. Spindly twigs grabbed at my hair, and the patch sewn over my jacket elbow tore. The bush was in need of pruning. Mamma had been the gardener, not father. There were signs of neglect everywhere, now that I looked closer. Weeds sprouted along the flower beds, and moss grew between the brick pavers. The gate needed oiling, and the front steps needed sweeping. I wondered if the housekeeper had kept the inside clean, or if she'd let her standards lapse too, now that Mamma wasn't there. I adjusted my position to alleviate the cramping in my legs. After a few more minutes, I needed to shift my weight again. What was I doing here? Why did I need to see him? He'd made it clear that he didn't want me. The devil's daughter, he'd called me, right before he hustled me outside into the rain. I'd stood near this very bush, crying, hoping he'd change his mind when his temper cooled, but knowing he would not. Then, like now, I knew I would never be forgiven for making Mamma's corpse come to life. I was an unholy abomination against God, according to my father. He should know, being a vicar. I was about to get up when the gate squeaked. I peered through the shrubbery to see a gentleman in a grey suit closing it. He was of medium height and slender build, with brown hair poking out from beneath his top hat. I caught only a glimpse of his face, but it was enough to know that he was about 40, with a strong jaw and nose. I didn't recognize him, so if he was a parishioner, he must be new to the area. I couldn't leave now. I might catch a glimpse of my father. Perhaps it was foolish to want to see a man who did not want to see me, yet I did. I never claimed to be anything but a fool. The stranger knocked, and the housekeeper opened the door. The stranger introduced himself, but all I heard was "Doctor." The rest was taken by the wind. Was father ill? I was trying to decide how I felt about that when the housekeeper asked him to wait, then disappeared. A moment later, he appeared in her place. Father. Emotion washed through me like tidal waves, threatening to overwhelm me. First happiness at seeing him alive and healthy, then sadness, but he didn't want me. And finally, anger for the manner in which he had disowned me at the age of only 13. I'd heard much later that he told his parishioners I'd been kidnapped. The police had even searched for me. I wondered how long a person needed to be missing for them to be declared dead. Did I even officially exist anymore? My emotions and thoughts stopped tumbling in all directions with the next words spoken by the stranger. I'm seeking a particular girl of 18 years of age. I believe one lives here. The look on my father's face probably matched mine. His mouth opened and closed, wobbling jowls that had gone pale. When he finally found his voice, it came to me clearly across the garden. You're mistaken. There's no girls here. He went to shut the door, but the stranger thrust his foot into the gap. I strained to hear. Are you Mr. Anselm Holloway? Kindly leave my premises, my father said. Not until I have answers. I believe you have a daughter, Miss Charlotte Holloway, who is 18. I told you. My father's voice had taken on that stern, commanding tone he used in his sermons, and when banishing daughters. There are no girls living here. Kindly remove yourself from my premises, Doctor. For one long moment, I thought the stranger would force his way into the house. But he did as asked and removed his foot. My father slammed the door, and the doctor walked back down the footpath. I was sure to get a better look at him this time. He was quite handsome for a man of middle age, with the smooth face of someone who spent most of his time indoors. He wore his whiskers very short and only on the sides. The flecks of grey in them gave him an air of authority that his soft cheeks did not. Should I announce myself to him now, or wait until I could slip away from the house undetected and catch up further along the street? I abandoned the idea altogether when I saw his eyes. They were filled with fury. Rage pulsed from him with every determined step. The muscles in his jaw twitched, and his lips peeled back from his teeth as he muttered something under his breath that I couldn't quite hear. He uncurled one fist to open the gate, then slammed it shut behind him. He stalked off down the pavement, stopping a few feet away to cast a piercing glare back at my father's house. Then he continued on, around the corner, and was gone from sight. No, I would not reveal myself to him yet, not until I knew if he was as dangerous as he looked. I considered how best to find out more about him as I walked back to Clerkenwell. Perhaps the housekeeper would tell me his full name if I asked, but she might alert Father to my visit. Perhaps I could return to the house tomorrow and wait again. The doctor might also return looking for me. I could then follow him home and question his neighbours as to his nature. But what if he caught me and was indeed up to no good? I had the horrible feeling that his searching for me was connected to the gossip my gang had been hearing that morning, and the thing I'd done in the Highgate holding cell. It might be wise to avoid him and lay low for a while. Or leave the gang altogether. Yes, I would do it that afternoon while there was still enough daylight. After I retrieved my few belongings, I would set off and get far away from Clerkenwell and Stringer's gang. I pulled the loose boards back from the hole in the wall, but someone blocked the entrance from the other side. Stringer came through, followed by Finlay and the others. They spilled onto the street like rats escaping a sinking ship via the porthole. "This is him!" Stringer shouted. I blinked at him. "Who are you talking to?" "You need to come with us." Someone gripped my elbow, but not hard. It was easy enough to wrench free. I spun round and backed away from the two burly men. "Don't touch me," I snapped. One of them held up his hands. "Apologies, boy, but we need to speak to you." "No, he needs to come with us." The other man countered with a roll of his eyes. He was a little taller than the first fellow, and a lot uglier. His features were put together like a roughly hewn cliff beneath the craggy ridge of his brow. A curved scar sliced across his cheek and pulled down the corner of one eye. His small mouth and thin lips seemed out of proportion to the rest of him. "Right," said the first man. His handsome face was a stark contrast to his friend's. Fair hair flopped down from beneath his hat and fell into wide grey eyes that blinked at me without guile. He smiled a dazzling smile. "Come on, lad. We'll see that you get a hot meal." He sniffed and wrinkled his nose. "And a bath." "I don't want food and a bath," I said, hoping they couldn't detect my lie. "I want to know where I'm going and why." "Can't tell you that," said the bigger man. "Orders are to bring you back." They seemed harmless enough, and the offer of food and a bath sounded wonderful. Too wonderful. I'd heard of street children being lured into slavery and prostitution in just such a manner. I lived by the rule that if something sounded too good to be true, it usually was. That rule had kept me safe so far, and I wasn't about to abandon it now. "Why me?" I asked them. Had they heard what had happened in the holding cell? If so, how had they traced me here so quickly? Money must have changed hands, and a few key questions asked of the right people. The police weren't well enough connected, so these fellows weren't officials. Whoever they were, I doubted they had good intentions. "Dunno," said the ugly one with a shrug of his heavy shoulders. "We just carry out orders." Convenient. "What do they offer you to rattle me?" I asked Stringer. "Enough." Stringer shoved me in the back. "Go on, go. We don't want you round here no more. You're trouble, Charlie, and your freak tricks will bring more people to our den if you don't bugger off. Word's out now, so you gotta go. Right, lads?" "Right," chimed in the other boys, even Mink. I shot them all withering glares, then turned back to the two newcomers. They'd taken a step closer to me, and they held themselves tense, as if ready to spring. If I were going to avoid being caught, I would have to be quick. "I'm not going anywhere with you until you tell me why," I said. The ugly one blew out an exasperated breath. "Bloody hell! Stop being a stubborn little turd and just come with us." The pretty one rolled his eyes. "What my friend is trying to say is that we mean you no harm, unless you don't cooperate." "It's cooperate, idiot, and well done. You just made the boy soil his trousers." "I'm not afraid of you," I told him. "You should be. Death won't be as civil as us." Death? They meant to kill me if I didn't go with them. Pretty held up his hands. "I didn't mean to frighten you, lad, but—" "Bloody hell," muttered Ugly. "We ain't got time for this. Grab him and let's go. Death'll have our guts if we take too long." "Death will come and do the job himself like he always does when you mess up." "Me?" I turned and ran. "Jesus," growled Pretty. "Get back here. It won't go well for you that way." Their footsteps pounded behind me, but they were slow, and I managed to streak ahead. "You should have grabbed him," I heard Ugly say. "You're not in charge here, I am." "You bloody well are not. He is." "He's not here." "Oh, yeah? Who's that then, eh?" Just as he said it, I tripped over something thrust in my path. I landed on the pavement on my hands and knees, scraping off several layers of skin. There was no time to wallow in the pain or assess the damage. I scrambled up, only to find two strong hands clamping down on my arms, pinning them to my sides. I struggled, but it was useless. The man behind me was far stronger. I stopped struggling to lull him, but his grip didn't relax. Damn and hell. I heard Ugly and Pretty approaching, and knew I had to act immediately or it would be 3 against 1. I kicked backward, smashing my foot as hard as I could into my captor's shin, then jerked my head back hard. Unfortunately, his height worked against me, and I only managed to hit ribs instead of a throat, chin, or nose. The kick earned a sharp intake of breath from my abductor, but otherwise he didn't make a sound. Nor did he loosen his grip. I was out of ideas. I was good at avoiding capture, usually, but not so good at freeing myself afterward. The panic seizing my breath and overriding my brain wasn't helping either. Should I scream? Would anyone come to my rescue if I did? Instinct took over and I struggled again, trying to wrench myself free. But that only made his fingers dig further into my flesh with bruising strength. "Stay still," he snarled, in a voice that welled up from the depths of his chest. "Or what?" I was pleased that I sounded defiant. If I couldn't have my liberty, I could at least hold on to some dignity. "Or I'll be forced to hurt you." As if he wasn't already. "Want me to shoot him, sir?" That was Ugly's voice. "Idiot," said Pretty. "What'll that achieve?" "Is cooperation." "Doubt he'll feel very cooperative with a bullet wound." The grip of the man holding me changed. But before I could use the opportunity to my advantage, I was rendered immobile once more. He wrenched my arms behind my back and pinned them there. I winced as pain shot down to my wrists and numbed my fingers. "You're hurting me!" The man they called Sir didn't answer. "To be fair, he did warn you," said Pretty. Ugly snorted a laugh. Sir shoved me forward, but I refused to walk. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. "Move," he said, his voice surprisingly calm in my ear. I pulled my knees up so that my feet were clear of the pavement. He didn't so much as grunt with the effort of suddenly taking all my weight. I, however, gasped as my arms screamed in agony and my left shoulder popped out of its socket. I bit my lip to stop myself crying out and tried kicking again, but it only served to put more pressure on my already burning arms and shoulders. "Fool," Pretty muttered. He appeared in front of me and, walking backward to keep pace, went to push my hair off my face. I jerked my head from side to side, then when that didn't work, spat at him. Ugly laughed. "Little blighter!" Pretty raised a hand to strike at me, but Sir's steely "don't" stopped him. "Go on ahead," Sir said. "Let me know if someone comes." Pretty glared at me, then he and Ugly strode off around the corner. "Stop resisting," Sir said to me. "Nobody wants to harm you." "Your name Mr. Nobody, eh?" I laughed at my joke, although I didn't find it funny. "I'm not going anywhere with you until you tell me what you want with me." "We can't talk here." "Then we won't be talking at all, Mr. Nobody." He continued to carry me forward, only to stop when Ugly's face appeared around the corner. "Gang of rough-looking types coming this way." A gang? They might be willing to help me, but it was unlikely. Most of the rough-looking types in Clerkenwell only helped when there was something in it for them. Yet I had to try and get them on my side. I could claim Sir and his men were police. Rough-looking types hated the constabulary. I opened my mouth to scream, but before a sound came out, Sir clamped a large hand over my mouth and my nose. He pulled me back against his body, one arm now bracing around my waist, still pinning my arms, the other smothering me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move to scratch at his hand. The harder I tried to breathe, the quicker I used up the remaining air in my lungs. My chest burned, my throat closed, and blackness crept in from the edges of my vision. He was going to kill me, and there wasn't a thing I could do about it. Fog clouded my thoughts. I felt my strength drain away. He finally let me go, but I could not have run even if I'd had my wits about me. The darkness swallowed me. I felt my body being lifted, but I was unsure if it were by human arms or the Reapers, come to take my soul to the afterlife. All I did know was that everything was about to change.